welcome to Sidekicks, the best, I would say, the best cybersecurity podcast.
And only.
Exactly. No. There are many to choose from. The best 30-plus minute podcast on the cybersecurity market in the world. And we're feeling particularly giddy today because we're doing our final preparations for RSAC. And Christina, how are you today?
I'm very well. Still waking up. It's really early. Of course, Rory, you got up much earlier today. Of course, you're 7 hours ahead, so you've had your tea. I've only had 1 cup of coffee, but I'm great. I'm actually really excited about RSA. I have to say, the last couple of days I was dreading it. I'm going to be honest, but something switched overnight, and I'm super excited about mostly seeing everyone and of course learning a lot. Yeah. How are you? Are you feeling excited or daunted at the moment?
I'm slightly daunted, only because it's going to be a long travel over there. It's going to be a two-stage flight, with the main part being 11 hours via Paris. And I'm slightly daunted if I look over my shoulder because the pile of things that I'm trying to get into my bag is growing by the minute.
Have you ever used those plastic bags that you suck the air out of that makes everything smaller? They're storage plastic bags. Yeah. I used them to travel recently, and they're quite amazing.
Yeah, they are quite amazing. It's interesting because I always, you shrink it down and you think, oh, that's going to be lighter, and it feels like you're lifting a large stone. It just sort of concentrates the mass.
It's true. Well, listen, so I think today we've got a couple of really exciting things we're doing on the podcast today. One is our guest. I'm so excited to talk to him. I've been following Chris Hughes, VP of Security Strategy at Zenity. I've been following him for 2 years, 3 years. I don't know. I've been reading his newsletter. I've dipped into his podcast. I think it's called Resilient Cyber. And he's a friend of a friend of a friend in the industry, like everyone, 6 degrees of separation. So we're going to have a fascinating, I'm sure, conversation with Chris. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about who we're going to see next week, what we think about their offerings. So just a handful, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just to kind of a taster, folks, of who we're going to see. We're going to see quite a few more people, but just a few highlights and things that we thought we should mention. So this week's special guest is Chris Hughes, VP of Security Strategy at Zenity. Hey, Chris, I finally got your name and title and company correct, so on the third attempt. But listen, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time. And I know you've had quite a challenging time of it recently.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and chat, and coming off of a house of a stomach bug with 5 kids. So it's been an adventurous weekend.
Yeah.
Well, so we don't need to ask you what keeps you up at night. We've already got the answer, right?
Unfortunately so.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited, John. As we were saying before we started recording, we've followed Chris's writings and blog and podcast and newsletter for quite a while. And so we're super excited to have Chris on, and we have some peeps in common. So always good to have a friend of a friend and a new friend on the show. So thanks for coming on. And the easy softball question, which always leads to very interesting, not so easy content, is what keeps you up at night? Well, we know that the flu does, so we're done. No, what else keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's an interesting and exciting time to be in cybersecurity in 2 directions. Like, one is there's the kind of fundamental redesigning or re-architecting of how we do so many things with the introduction of agents and agentic AI, and how it kind of breaks traditional security paradigms in a lot of different ways. But then there's also the optimistic and promising side of AI in terms of how it's revisioning what we look at when it comes to GRC or AppSec or SecOps or pen testing and all of the things in between. So it's kind of a double-edged sword that is AI, and what it means for our industry is really what keeps me excited, interested, and up at night reading about and thinking about all these things.
It is super exciting. And as a lifelong learner, I know you are one, I am one, I know Rory is one. It's like so exciting to have the internet and vast amounts of content indexed and at our fingertips, right?
Yeah.
That's fabulous. But what could go wrong?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, I find myself having conversations with LLMs, full blown conversations about every topic,
Absolutely.
you could think of. But to your point, having that access to that data is also problematic in a lot of ways.
I do remember. I mean, I do remember. But that point is it's very well taken. The fact that I don't know if you guys would have encyclopedias across in the US, but how do you find a trusted source?
Right.
You would have a line of credit for each volume of a series of encyclopedias, and they were like gold. It was like if there was an argument, you went to the encyclopedia. If you really needed to know something, you went and found a book that was from a reputable author. And I suppose people are still looking for those parallels today, aren't they, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. It's like, on one hand, you can have all this information at your fingertips, but there's still need to dig into the source data, make sure that it's not hallucinated, make sure that it's real and trustable, verifiable, et cetera. So it's definitely still not a silver bullet for sure.
Well, in a way, it makes it murkier because the curation of information that went into trusted encyclopedic sources or literary sources or reference materials took a lot of time. And now we've got this vast amount of information that is indexed. So it's right at our fingertips. It looks authoritative. I can't tell you how many times I've said to my husband, it's not a they, it's an it. They are not thinking. It is not thinking. It is actually just curating something for you. And it looks great. It looks authoritative. But it doesn't mean that it's actually the right information. So to your point, verifying sources is important. The one thing that's keeping me up at night quite a bit is agentic AI. So I'm used to working with LLMs all day in and day out. I don't trust them 100%, but I do use them. I use that skill, because I think if we don't, we're left behind. It is important for us to up our productivity. Agents, I find, are fascinating. When we have these agentic AI tools that are going off and doing whatever the mission is we've given them, they have a lot of permissions. I just read one of your posts about the browser has become the central point of as an OS now, and we're giving permissions to agents in ways that we haven't before. But it's also a place that wasn't meant to have new identities spawned, if you will. So what do you think? What's your latest learning about agents? I'm curious. What are you thinking about right now with agents?
Really, it's how we're at this weird intersection of a security usability trade-off. Like, as you all know, the more usable, the more functional a system is, right? The more value it has in the market or to consumers, to customers, things of that nature. So you look at the rise of agentic and AI browsers or agentic coding tools, right? And you see the adoption curve is insane, like something we've never seen before. And it's because of all the capabilities that they have in terms of reading, writing, producing code, browsing sites, taking actions, all the things that they can do, make them so valuable and enticing for users. But it's all those things that they can do that also make them so dangerous, potentially dangerous, and has so many different risks for the enterprise. So we're trying to navigate that. And as we know in security, we almost always lose to usability, right? The business has needs. They're trying to accomplish certain things. They want to, whether it's developers or business users, whomever, they want to get things done. But we want to minimize or mitigate risks. And so we're at that kind of struggle or balance between the two. And watching the industry navigate that is really what's fascinating to see, and also pretty scary, to be honest with you.
Well, but it's not really new, this conundrum of, security departments being the department of no, whereas business wanting to be the enabler of everything that is new. SaaS, cloud, right? We've been API. We've been here before. What makes this so scary to you? I mean, I know why it scares me, but I'd love to hear why it scares you.
Yeah, I think the big thing that's the real paradigm shift is the introduction of autonomy or agency of the agents. The ability to take actions is the big differentiator. Like the first rise of AI. Obviously, AI has been around for a long time, but Gen AI, I should say, and LLMs was, you give it an input, you get an output. As you said, it's not thinking; it's kind of just curating content for you. And there was some risk there of, reputational harm or misinformation, false information, hallucinations, etc. But the ability now to take actions, whether it's in the browser, in the enterprise context, in the coding context, that ability to take actions is really what makes the new paradigm of securing this technology so still problematic. And, whether it's the goal of the agents, being hijacked or misdirected or misusing and exploiting the tools that they have. We've struggled for, years, as you said, with several issues in security, one of which, of course, is identity and access management. We've struggled with that with human users, and now we're poised to have, tens to hundreds or thousands of agents per human user. So it's going to exacerbate challenges on that front. And of course, the ever-present software supply chain security kind of challenges. I had wrote a book a few years ago called Software Transparency, talking about, challenges around proprietary and open source software when it comes to software supply chain security. Those challenges are now even further complicated with AI coding agents, generating and using open source, introducing, phantom dependencies or leveraging quote unquote skills, as we've seen the rise of skills start to take off. So it's just an entirely new paradigm of security in some ways, but then in other ways, as you pointed out, these principles of least permissive access control and, microsegmentation, et cetera, these are principles and concepts that have been around for decades. It's just a new kind of technology paradigm or wave that we're trying to apply them to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, that zero trust or least privilege access is critical, but I think we're not thinking that way. And what I'm seeing is we're not putting in the policy and guardrails that we need to put in around agents. And that is where we get into trouble, because they can be ephemeral. They can create new identities. As you say, they can spin up new services. They can autonomously, with their own agency, go out to do the mission that we've encumbered them with and make it happen on our behalf. But if we're not setting up the policy and the guardrails to start and thinking about them as agents, I think that's where we get into trouble. And Rory, I hear you trying to jump in.
I had a question. It was something that you said. Well, you've said a few times, Christina. And Christina, we kind of run the gamut in terms of when we talk about AI and security and where is it best introduced. And of course, there is really no best place. It should be kind of top to bottom, right? And one of the things we've often talked about is how it needs to be introduced at the code level, because at the code level, if we introduce security there, then, that's a good start, right? Christina, we've talked about this, haven't we, before?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been reading about recently, and your opinion on this, Chris, would be really interesting, is talking about trying to get to some best practice or, excellence for engineering for AI. In other words, typically for software engineering, the metrics that are used are things, and when you're debugging and whatever, it's about deployment frequency, lead time to production, change failure rate, and so on. This was something that from an AI perspective, we perhaps need some new metrics. One of the suggestions from the guys at CodeStrap, for example, is measuring the number of tokens burned to get an approved pull request or, formally accepted change in software. I thought that was quite intriguing. Have you come across this much? Is that something you write about? Now, if you have, excuse me, because I'm not up to speed in the same way that Christina is on your writing.
So you're saying in the sense of, if I caught that right, looking at the volume of pull requests to kind of measure productivity, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. How, because I think often the criticism is that it's kind of easy to be sloppy if you use AI generated code. Sloppy in as much as, it's easier for security vulnerabilities to creep in or just to be brought in through a pull from somewhere. Do we need more best practice when it comes to software engineering, when it comes to AI and security?
I would say yes and no. I think there's definitely new paradigms in terms of the technologies of using AI coding tools, and we're seeing the AppSec industry kind of convulse in some ways with the introduction of security from the frontier labs, like Cloud Code Security and other things that have been introduced from the frontier labs. But the fundamental principles of security, findings, et cetera, are still valid and still true. The industry has been moving in a better direction in AppSec in a general sense for a while now, even before AI, when it came to moving away from just base CVSS scores towards things like exploitation probability with EPSS or known exploitation with KEV. But none of these things or reachability analysis, for example, too. But none of these things are foolproof, or there's no silver bullets, unfortunately, in security. We are seeing a big surge of pull request volume by many organizations who are adopting these tools. The challenge is, of course, that as great as these tools are at generating code, they still have high proportions of vulnerable code, 30 to 50%, depending on the research out there. And it makes sense because they've been trained on large bodies of open source software, which of course has its own vulnerabilities and flaws and so on. So it just perpetuates those issues downstream. The big challenge is trying to keep up with that scale of volume and pace of development velocity. We already struggled already, right? That's why big backlogs of vulnerabilities have bloomed in organizations before AI. And with the introduction of this, kind of agentic coding approach, we're just struggling even more to keep up, right? So now people are trying to inject, whether it's native capabilities from the frontier labs into security review, integrating AppSec tooling into the IDE, or, in these agentic coding tools and flows with developer workflows and things like that to try to keep pace. But it's definitely a challenge. It's something we've struggled with already, and now it's kind of faster than ever.
I want to switch gears a little bit and throw you a curveball here. I mean, something that we're thinking about is we didn't warn him. We didn't warn him about this. Something that we're looking at is some data from a survey that we just got in, our syndicated survey on AI and agentic AI security. And I had this conversation a month or two ago with a CISO friend who brought up the idea of we're moving towards probabilistic security versus deterministic security. So we threw that into the survey, and we did a lot of maturity indexing on the folks we were surveying. And we also asked, what do you think about this idea of probabilistic security, where you're accepting a certain amount of risk because it's going to be machine securing machine, it's going to have to operate at the speed of machine, and how we're going to move, or are we going to move away from the more manual, more deterministic set of security policies or programs that we've had, and go towards more accepted risk. I mean, we already accept risk, but moving towards that probabilism. So philosophically, 80% of these folks said yes. And they said within, 18 to 24 months, they feel like this shift is going to be occurring. What do you think, Chris? Is this something that is just a pie in the sky idea? Do you think it's necessary? Where do you come down on that discussion?
No, I think it's a super valid point, because we're seeing this introduced in various ways. Like one is, certain longstanding AppSec methodologies like SAST, for example, stack application.
Yep.
That's being integrated with AI, where you have AI native SAST, and it has some really promising results in terms of lower false positives, things like that. But again, it's probabilistic. You may get different results each time. There's no guarantees. And then in the context of AI or agentic security itself, you see things like LLM as a judge, where we're using AI to kind of secure AI. So it's like probabilistic layers of security on top of one another to keep pace, just because it's an innovative and fast way to apply this technology from a security perspective. But again, to your point, it's not deterministic. We know LLMs are non-deterministic. So it's a valid point. I would argue in the sense of being controversial, we could say that we've long-standing had a practice of kind of implicitly accepting risk without necessarily openly acknowledging it. It happens in business contexts all the time, where risk is just kind of implicitly accepted, even if no one necessarily signs off or openly accepts it. I guess in this case, at least we're being honest, right? Or calling it out in the open, saying we're accepting some level of risk by taking this approach. So maybe that's a bit refreshing. At least we're being honest with ourselves.
Well, and I hope it is called out. I mean, I hope as much as we can update our risk management programs and our risk registries, I mean, we won't know what we won't know in terms of probabilistic security. But if we can at least call it out and say there is this unknown quantity or unknown arena that we're accepting minor risk, or, I mean, we don't know exactly whether it'll be minor, but it's an interesting idea, because it comes down to the watchers watching the watchers, right? And I think there's no way we can humanly keep up, and we have to employ, as you said, the judge, the LLM judge to help us. I see it coming already. I'm seeing tools, right? Rory and I have been getting briefings from some companies you would know well, which we can't name yet until after they announce things next week at RSA, but we're seeing a lot of things in the autonomous security arena. Of course, what I ask is, everything old is new again, so what could go wrong? We said, we're going to move everything to the cloud, and everybody said, oh, no, it's not secure. And now everybody is in the cloud. It might be a hybrid cloud across multiple clouds, but everyone is in cloud. And we have seen vulnerabilities occur, quite significant outages, quite significant vulnerabilities. And we will see those with agents and with autonomous security. I guess what keeps me up at night, just to loop back to that question, is really on the critical infrastructure side. And I loved your piece on the NCS and what we're seeing in terms of bringing in private sector to help with securing some of the things that we need help securing with. And we have as a national government, we have brought in the private industry, infrastructure for a long time to help with that, or private enterprises and security companies. But to your point, regulatory control is kind of taking a little bit of a back seat. And so when I look at critical infrastructure, and when I look at that we're giving a lot of power to these agentic and LLM overlords, it does have a potential humongous, scary vulnerability that could be created, especially if we're releasing some of the regulatory control.
Yeah, I think so many things you said there are worth unpacking, and it's spot on. And so on one hand, we talked about the probabilistic nature of AI and LLMs, for security purposes and in general. There's also looking to apply that to different industries, whether it's critical infrastructure and so on. There's a case for what's being called now hard boundaries, right? And I wrote a piece about this recently, where you have maybe some soft guardrails for certain use cases or environments, and then for others, you have hard boundaries where you apply deterministic controls at the underlying architectural level because you're not willing to accept certain risks in certain environments, right? Like depending on the critical infrastructure or national security or sensitive data, so on and so forth. That is a topic that the industry is navigating. And then the NCS is really interesting on the regulatory burden and innovation over compliance angle, because I came out of the federal government. I spent time at different agencies as a federal employee, and then also in the military, and I've navigated all the compliance regimes, all the acronym soups that we have of compliance regimes, and
right.
And I know them all very well, and they are a pain, and they are a nightmare, and they're duplicative and overlapping and cumbersome and everything in between. But we know that cybersecurity is also a market failure. And if we just leave it up to the market, commercial enterprises aren't just going to altruistically prioritize security. They're always going to prioritize speed to market and revenue over security. So it's a very difficult dichotomy between the two. And I love the fact that they're looking to, alleviate the compliance burden. But I don't think the market's just going to, as I said, voluntarily take up security if they can profit or drive revenue or speed to market and so on instead. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. And then concepts like software liability, which had a pretty strong presence in the prior NCS, have kind of fell to the background now. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes, if at all. And if we leave it up to the market, where that'll get us, because I think we have decades of proof of what happens already if we leave security up to the market.
Right. Yeah. Wow. There is a lot more we can talk about. And I hope we get to have you back on, because I think just unpacking some of what you just said would be another whole podcast episode. And I know you have your own podcast, and we're so grateful that you would take a little bit of time to visit us on ours. And I hope we're going to get to meet you next week at RSA. I know it's absolutely crazy out there, but if we see you running across Yerba Buena or in the halls or vice versa, let's grab each other and say hello.
Sounds good. I will be there. So I hope to run into you all.
Great.
Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Travel safe. Have a great show next week. Thanks again for
you
coming
as well.
on.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye now.
Yeah, so Christina, as we said at the top of the show, we were going to chat briefly about some of the companies that we're going to meet with at RSAC and just give our kind of impressions on what they're doing, where they are now, and the reasons why I guess we're interested in chatting with them.
Yes. And do you want to start, or shall I start, or how do you want to do it?
I can do the first one if you like.
That would be great.
Great. Okay, so the first on my list is LevelBlue. Now, I know you know LevelBlue quite well, and certainly as a managed security services provider from the spin-off from AT&T in 2024, they are one of the big players out there, right? Cloud-based, increasingly AI-driven managed security services. I think at the moment, revenue of probably over $1 billion, over 3,000 customers, probably 2,000 employees. There's some big numbers there. They're a big player. We have talked and written about them a lot, partly because of the capabilities they have, but also because
they just keep acquiring.
They do. Serial acquirers.
And they're making good on their claim.
They are.
That they are going to pull all these pieces together, and they want to be the largest MSSP in the land.
Yeah. And
they're putting their money where their mouth is, right?
Exactly.
So of course we have to cover that.
Exactly. So I'll just do a quick rundown of who they bought this last year, over a 4-month period. So there was Stroz Friedberg, Aon's cybersecurity consulting business, and Elysium. Elysium brought forensic and legal capabilities there. They then bought Trustwave. They gaining in the bargain Spider Labs, which is one of the well-known threat intelligence units. They then bought Cybereason, and that gave them some additional EDR, XDR capabilities, additional market reach into other parts of the world. And then most recently, they announced a major partnership with Fortra, whereby they are acquiring the Alert Logic managed services business. Yeah. So that's MDR, XDR, and WAF, so Web Application Firewall businesses. Now, we've talked a lot about this. Some of this gives some specific capabilities and fills some gaps in the LevelBlue portfolio, which is already pretty extensive. But then also it provides a kind of an on-ramp, or particularly more options for the SME and SMB customers. So kind of expanding beyond many of the existing capabilities they had. So Christina, you said the model kind of showed how that LevelBlue can rehome what we call the kind of orphaned technologies, right?
Yeah.
That may have lacked focus under previous ownership, but revitalizing them with new R&D and investment. I think that was probably a very good observation.
Well, and I think it's true. I giggled because it could be considered a little off color to say that. Mm-hmm. But I mean it in the nicest way. I do feel that some of these assets, meaning the companies they've acquired, were not being invested in or expanded in the ways they could or should have been. And we've talked a lot about it, so we won't go down that path too long. But I will say what I'm seeing so far is the wood behind the arrow in terms of integration that's occurring. Mm-hmm. I am hearing in the market that folks are starting to see some competencies from LevelBlue in the competitive sphere that make them nervous. And that is an indicator to me that LevelBlue is doing something correctly. So are you seeing this as well? What do you think?
Definitely. Their name comes up again and again. It kind of dovetails into one of the approaches that we talked about when we discussed the MDR market last week, if you remember. And folks, if you didn't get a chance to listen to that episode, please do. And it kind of has a compare and contrast of competitive approaches. LevelBlue very much has said they want to maintain this vendor agnostic approach, even though they have their own capabilities, right, through something like Cybereason. And it's planning to support third-party integrations and so on. That makes them very attractive as a vendor. If you unless you're a completely greenfield site, but if you have any kind of infrastructure legacy environment of whatever kind, you will probably want to find some way to integrate, enhance, transition, or have some kind of a hybrid model. And having an approach which allows you to then add those capabilities in without throwing everything out is a very good approach, and it makes it quite attractive for customers who are looking competitively at other platforms.
Yeah, I agree. And so we'll be meeting with them. Great. Should we do another one?
Yeah, well, why don't you go next? What about IBM?
Okay. Yeah, what about IBM? I'm not going to say how big they are, how much their revenue might be, because who knows? IBM keeps it very close to the vest. They always have done. And things have changed quite a bit in the last few years as they've sold off their QRadar SaaS product to Palo Alto. They disentangled themselves from Kyndryl. So some of the revenue from both of those things went over to those companies, Palo or to Kyndryl. But then they have partnerships. They've got quite the partnership with Palo Alto that is bringing in new revenue. So it's hard to determine what their revenue is. I guess that's my point. But I will say that they have a great deal of innovation. That's probably the best place to start with them. So on the software side, they're known for artificial intelligence, data and analytics, right? They're known for their security software, especially in data and in identity security. So I would say those are two things to pay attention to. And we have had briefings recently with Guardium, which is their data protection and data posture management portfolio. And I would say, in a way, they're looked at as a legacy provider. There's a great expression that one of the IBM people mentioned to me the other day. He said, yes, we are the older solution, but when elephants walk, dogs bark.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an Indian expression, and I love it, because essentially what you're saying is there is the heft and weight and largeness of this elephant, this massive animal, this Guardium technology that's been around for 2 decades. And it makes all the other animals sort of wake up and pay attention because it has this heft and this strength. And so Guardium is that. And I'm glad I got to use that in a phrase today because I've been thinking about it. So Guardium is not only the strong legacy, mature graybeard in the data security sphere, but also securing data all the way out to the future of post-quantum cryptography needs, so that quantum resilience is very much a part of their portfolio, which makes it not just legacy, but very future forward. So, they're securing AI, they're securing PQC. I like Guardium a lot. Enough on Guardium. I won't go into the identity side because I want to keep this somewhat brief and talk about services, but they have the Verify portfolio on identity, so dip into that if you wish, folks. On the services side, there's 3 or 4 pillars that we like to look at on the services side for IBM: strategy and risk, and that's where they're coming at the company from a perspective of, let's look at your overall program. Let's look at your compliance needs, your regulatory needs. Let's make sure that you're developing your program in such a way that you're handling all of those standards and regulatory requirements, but also that you're building it in such a way that you're reducing risk. And so let's look at your risk management program as well. And then there's the data and AI security portfolio and also identity. So they're looking at, how do you secure agents? How do you secure human identities? How do you also do the comprehensive services around data security with their data software, their data security software, but also vendor agnostically? And then lastly, I'd say their threat management capabilities. And these are kind of around managed services and their X-Force platform. They've got great intelligence through X-Force. They do incident readiness and response. And then they also have cyber management services that they do.
So let's talk about Netcraft, Christina.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you've put together on Netcraft and what you think. Yeah.
Well, Netcraft is an interesting company. I think, given the times we live in, new companies here, there, and everywhere spinning up, getting investment, appearing, disappearing. So because Netcraft is, it's been around for a while. It's very well established. Well-established cyber
it's
firm.
Like 25, it's like 25
30 years old.
Yeah.
It's got some good, mature solutions. So phishing takedowns, threat intelligence, cybercrime detection, and so on. If you look at some of the stats that Netcraft publishes, it says it takes down nearly 1/3 of the world's phishing sites generally,
right,
which is huge. And they've added up, they've done a kind of a running total of the number of malicious URLs that they've ever blocked, and it's over 225 million or something like that, which is incredible.
Wow.
They are one of the kind of bedrocks. But as we've talked about, we often think that Netcraft kind of flies under the radar when you compare to some of the larger industry giants, right? So they're not showy. They very much just kind of get on and what in terms of what they do. But it's also fair to say that since we started talking with them more, they've been going about refreshing their messaging and positioning. Right. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they've just announced a number of initiatives. One, that it's launching what it's calling this preemptive domain disruption, which is an AI-powered feature or tool or sets of features that gives what they call predictive capabilities that proactively identify, disrupt, and take down criminally controlled domains before they're used in phishing attacks and fraud campaigns. So they have kind of emerged, if you like, not emerged from stealth because they've been around for a while, but emerged with a kind of a new mission, new emphasis, and so on. They've also updated their website, which looks great. I mean, it's not that the previous one looked bad, but it's a much fresher face to the world, much more modern approach to things. So
It does look great. I'm looking at it right now, and they really have modernized it, which, it takes quite a bit of time and effort and work to make that happen.
Oh,
So, congrats on that.
So I think, here's a company that has been around for a while, but they've kind of reinvented themselves, perhaps it'd be fair to say. And we increasingly hear their name mentioned as, oh, yes, we come across Netcraft. Oh, yeah, they're one of our key competitors, which perhaps you might not have heard before. It's not that they're new, but they are, let's say, newly competitive. I think also, again, given the times we live in, some of the things that they specialize in are becoming even more of a threat these days and becoming more dangerous because of the fact that AI tools and so on are being used offensively as opposed to purely defensively. So definitely one to watch. So we'll be chatting with them at RSAC.
You know how we were having the discussion about sophisticated branding and using a little bit of humor or levity or caricature or iconography that we think is appropriate and fun, perhaps, in our own brand. Well, what I'm noticing on their new website is some of the very clever verbiage they're using. Like under the core disruption capabilities, they say, criminals hate us, let's make them hate you too.
That's good, yeah.
And then the other one, in their next gen disruption, our superpowers become your superpowers. Under visibility, they say seeing more because we see it all. Okay, fine. But then I love under speed, they say, look, almost no hands. So good. Clever verbiage, very modern website. They are doing things that they've done for 25, 30 years, but they're also innovating and adding more and more AI to their portfolio and this preemptive takedown, right? That is really interesting to me. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Right. Who have you got next, Christina?
Yeah, so Zenity.io. I think is really intriguing. I mean, today's guest is Chris Hughes from Zenity, but they're really fascinating and very much in the midst of today's challenges, the agentic AI development assistance. They're very much looking at how do you monitor, detect, respond, comply around Gen AI, agentic AI, right? So it's a very different company than either of the three that we've talked about, right? So you've talked about LevelBlue, MSSP, acquiring lots of orphaned technologies and bringing them together into the large MSS category that they're working towards. IBM being legacy, but also innovative, and really looking across a very wide portfolio in cybersecurity. And then you were talking about Netcraft, which is, digital brand protection, takedowns, this preemptive takedowns. I mean, fascinating, but very different from Zenity. Zenity, I don't know how long they've been in business, but they're really starting to get a name for their platform in the observability, in the AI-SPM front, in the AIDR, that detect and respond capabilities. Their capabilities around SaaS management and also being device-based, right? So you can have it either way. Those are really interesting pieces to me. So, their marketing says that they secure AI agents everywhere. And I have to believe that they're actually doing a good job identifying agents, helping develop policy and governance around agents, and then helping companies look at, how fragmented the attack surface is with agents, or how their adoption of AI and agents is very decentralized. It's kind of like the old shadow IT conversation, now shadow AI conversation that we're having, right? People are slapping, their own Gen AI tools hither and thither. They're building their own agents in ways that, IT and security can't track. So they are, as they say, purpose-built to secure how enterprises actually operationalize AI. And that, I believe them after having chatted with, many people around the company and then I think we're getting to know them better. And so we'll see them at RSA, and stay tuned for more on their AI observability, their security posture management, and their AI DR. So folks, if you were left hanging and you have questions for Chris or for us, get in touch. You can find me at Christina@richmondadvisorygroup.com.
And you can find me at Rory@richmondadvisorygroup.com. So thanks, folks, for tuning in. Appreciate you taking the time to do so, and hope you can join us again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.